Children learn the rules at school, the signal to be quiet, not to be late for class, and what due dates mean. We learn the rules of our places of employment, how long a lunch break is to last. We learn the rules in the hospital when visiting hours are over, or if you need to wear a gown and a mask when you go into someone's room. There are rules for the community park. No alcohol, and please curb your dog. There have always been rules in traveling, especially when we enter a culture different from our own. A good tour guide will teach you the rules before you get off the bus. When Tom and I went to the Holy Land, we learned there are things you did, and there are definitely things you do not do. Rules govern much of how we live. And when we don't learn the rules, we don't function very well. When the rules are wrong, like the rules of Jim Crow that still exist today, we work to change them. When rules become arcane, like some of the rules of our denomination, we work to change them. And when issues emerge, we work to create rules that are just, like with our use of social media. Leviticus is a rule book, a kind of handbook for the Israelites as they create this new nation for God. Even though some of the rules seem very strange to us, there was good reason behind them. The rules were meant to keep the people holy, to keep them focused on God, to keep them in a community, and to set them apart from other nations. And while many of them seem harsh or unkind to us, we have to remember that at the time they were extremely progressive. There are many rules about sexual relations, spelling out over and over again what is acceptable. The Israelites were surrounded by cultures in which there were no rules about sexual relations. And so the Mosaic Code goes into great detail to guard against incest and brutality. These were laws to protect women and children in an age when they had very few protections. Some even protect men from victimization, which often occurred when men were captured in battle. Most of the laws laid down in Leviticus merely state what actions are lawful and what actions are not lawful, and the punishment for crossing that line. But in our passage for today, we are challenged in a rather different way. In this passage, we are required to not just focus on our actions, but what is behind our actions. Justice must be part of our actions. Of course, we are to have sympathy for others, but we have to examine that sympathy and make sure that it is not misguided and treats everyone fairly. Certainly, our political climate today calls for wise sympathy toward one another. Our denominational climate today calls for wise sympathy. When the law states, "Do not profit by the blood of your neighbor," the Hebrew is a little more complicated than the English. It goes beyond profiting from the death of our neighbor to not standing idly by when our neighbor is in danger. For example, with the latest federal budget proposal, we see that our neighbors who are on Medicare and Medicaid are in danger, as are those on SNAP and other feeding assistance programs. Now, the next law is very important for us to understand in the contentious society in which we live. You shall not hate your kin in your heart. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your kin. The laws and codes of Israel are unlike ordinary legal codes because they're not just concerned with actions, but with attitudes. They recognize how destructive bottled up resentment can be and caution us against wrong feelings as well as wrong acts. Attitudes feed into actions. And often, before we even know what we're doing, God's wisdom shed on the Israelites in this law continues to be instructive for us. Most Christians work very hard and pretty well at not being vengeful. But that grudge thing is more difficult because it's not necessarily about negative actions, but the state of our souls. For example, if I asked Julie to lend me a wrench and she refuses, and later Julie asks me to lend her my hammer and I refuse, that's vengeance. That's mess with me, I'm going to mess with you. But if Julie refuses to lend me her wrench, and later I actually lend her my hammer, but I say to her, I'm lending you my hammer even though you didn't lend me your wrench, that's a grudge. Pointing out that I am the better person. Or even thinking that I am is a grudge. Pointing out that I am the better person is holding myself above her in my heart. Just holding that kind of attitude is unlawful in God's nation. So it's not just about our actions, it's also about our hearts and our souls. We may not think anyone knows the grudges of our souls, but they actually become pretty evident in the way we talk to one another and the way we act toward one another. And they are certainly known by God, and they're known by us. The law does not leave us in misery because we have broken the law. At the end of each section of God's law, God declares, I am your Lord. God is always driving home to us that we are not alone in working to perfect our faith and our lifestyle. We have God's constant presence to not only point out where we fall short, but to lift us up when we fall down, brush us off, and help us to walk in faith with sure and steadier steps. It is amazing that our God knows us and loves us with this level of intimacy, and that through God's grace, we may share that love with others.